I'm going to be real with y'all. I have been putting this off because I have been nervous as hell. I have been talking about doing this towards the end of every episode for at least a season and a half, if not 2 seasons, with every guest that I've had. And most of the time, I have cut it out in editing because if I put it out in the universe, it means I have to do it. I have gone from putting so much pressure on myself to make something so perfect and polished, all the way to having such extreme imposter syndrome. I have been a sexual health educator for almost 20 years, and I have been sitting here doubting my own knowledge and my own skill set. Every single guest I have had on, every single message I get from the listeners, and every ounce of support that I get from my friends and my loved ones has given me the confidence to take this leap. Hey, welcome to Meet Me at the Spot, where pleasure meets education. This is the space where we get real about sex, relationships, and everything in between. I'm your host, Holly Eckelberger, and I'm a longtime sexual health educator, activist, and content creator. I will be your guide through conversations that blend curiosity, pleasure, and truth. Together with some amazing guests, we'll break down stigma, celebrate bodies, and learn how to embrace sexual health with confidence and joy. So get comfy because it's time for the show to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Meet Me at the Spot, where pleasure meets education. I'm your host, Holly, and I honestly can't believe it, but I made it to the end of season 4. When I started this season, I was unsure of the direction, and to be honest, I was starting to feel like, has this podcast run its course? For the last week, I've been sitting with this season and reflecting on making this episode, and I recognize that this season has felt different. Not just in the conversations, but in what I was actually trying to build here. For the first time since starting this show, this didn't feel like surface level sex ed to me. This felt like truth telling, community. It really felt like growth. And that growth is only the beginning of my vision. But I will save that part to the end of the episode. For this episode, I just want to take a moment to really reflect on the season because it was truly an incredible experience for me, and I hope it was just as awesome for you all. I started this season with episode 110, Fat, Fabulous, and Fucking Great. And I was so honored to be asked to record my podcast episode live from Philly FatCon. I got to use an actual recording studio. The room had a wall that was fully see-through, so attendees at the conference could peek in and watch the recording as it was happening live. It was a moment that I am still in disbelief that it happened. I knew at that moment exactly how I wanted to start season 4. I put the call out to attendees if anyone was interested in sharing their thoughts live on the show, and to my surprise, people actually answered. And I had the honor of chatting with Noelle, Jillian, and Danielle, who gave so much advice and real honesty. From the beginning, I wanted to be clear that I am not blaming my body anymore. And I don't want you blaming yours either. I am not shrinking myself to be deserving of pleasure or even credibility. I'm not waiting until I look a certain way to feel good in my body. And to be clear, this is more than just sex, but this is really about putting myself out there as an educator, an activist, and a podcast host. That conversation really set the tone for everything that came after it this season. From there, I was able to get into some of the harder conversations, like in episode 111, when I talked about birth control and really unpacked the history behind it, including the connections to eugenics. This was a really special episode for me because I have always loved Thanks Birth Control Day. And I really wanted people to feel educated and empowered when it comes to their birth control options. I can't talk about sexual health without talking about systems. And I can't talk about access without talking about harm. This season, I didn't want to avoid that. I knew it was necessary that I leaned even more into it. And that just carried throughout the season. I expanded what sex ed even means. Like in episode 118, when I brought in conversations around immigration and storytelling and empathy with Heidi De La Cruz. Because sex doesn't exist in a vacuum. As an educator and activist, I am always talking about how social justice issues are all interconnected. And this season really pushed me to have these conversations that are related to reproductive justice. I also made space to honor where this work comes from. In episode 120, when I talked about Black leaders in reproductive health, I took a step back and acknowledged that this work didn't start with me. There are people who have been doing this work, fighting for this work, long before me. And it's important that I name that, honor that, and continue that legacy. And well, you all know me. I also held space for curiosity and joy. This was really highlighted in episode 112 with Marlo Renee Stewart in talking about sex education in the South, in episode 113 with Ashley Manta in talking about sex and THC use, episode 115 with Lilith Fox in talking about kink among neurodivergent folks, in episode 116 with Krista White in talking about the need for sex ed for LGBTQ plus folks. In episode 119 with my chat with Dr. Stacy Friedman in enhancing intimacy. And in episode 121 with Dirty Lola in talking about how to make sex ed educational and fun. This was really important for me to focus on this season because one of the reasons I started my business and my brand and the podcast is to talk about pleasure and to do that without shame. It was important to remind myself and you all that we are allowed to explore, to ask questions, and to not have it all figured out. I absolutely love having guests and learning from their lived experience and the wisdom they bring to me and all of the listeners. I also knew it was important to start building on my expertise as a sexual health educator. And I had a couple solo episodes where I got to highlight my knowledge while creating some free resources to accompany the episode. From episode 114, I created my holiday sexual health guide as a judgment-free roadmap to staying sexually well, emotionally grounded, and fully to be in your pleasure throughout the holidays. And in episode 117, I created a pleasure and advocacy reset inventory, a guided reflection and intention setting tool designed to help you check in with your sexual wellness, pleasure, and advocacy practices at the start of the year. Both of those resources are available for free at my website, and I will link them again in the show notes for you. I also spent this season holding space for real stories. Like in episode 122, Jim Manika talked about turning pain into advocacy, what it looks like to take lived experiences, especially hard ones, and build something from them. That conversation was a reminder that people are doing this work not just because it is important, but because it is deeply personal. And then in episode 123, I got to chat with Katie S. Moore, who does this work every single day. It was a strong reminder that folks are out here filling in the gaps and creating the education and resources, like her very own sex toy shop that she started, that so many of us didn't get. Because let's be real, most of us were not given comprehensive, inclusive, pleasure-centered sex education, and that has had real consequences. In episode 124, Karina North and I talked about being child-free and really unpacked the pressure that exists around what our lives are supposed to look like. That conversation was so powerful, not only for me, but from so many of you that I heard from. And it was really about choice and autonomy and questioning the narratives that we've been handed and taking time and being able to decide what actually works for us. Then in episode 125, I got to talk about one of my personal favorite topics, which is helping adults have the sex talks with the young people in their lives. It was a strong moment for me to record this episode because it reminded me that if I don't talk about these things, I can't work to change these things. Then in episode 126, I got to chat with the hilarious Byron and Margaret, and it allowed me to come back to what it actually looks like to apply this information in real life. This is not just about learning information, but how to use it. And they talked about navigating relationships and setting boundaries and making decisions that align with who you are. Episode 127 with Becca really reinforced that autonomy piece, that you get to decide what works for your body, your relationships, and your life. That is yours. It's not society's, not anyone else's. It's yours. And by the time I got to my last episode, episode 128, with the fabulous Mike and Dory, it really felt like everything was coming together. Like all of these conversations weren't separate anymore, they were connected. It felt like I had been building something, and you all were right there with me. And I think that's been my biggest takeaway from this season. I was able to center pleasure as something you deserve and not something that you have to earn. I was able to expand sex ed beyond just talking about sex and into the realities of the world we live in. And I just kept coming back to autonomy, choice, and this real life application. And what I realized through all of this is that you don't just want conversations. You want tools. You want support in actually applying all of this to your life. You want to know how to have these conversations, how to set these boundaries, how to navigate relationships, and how to unlearn some of the things you've been taught. And the most important part of that for me is you all deserve that. And that is what I'm going to be working on during this break. I am taking the advice and the wisdom that I have shared with you all from the first episode of this season, and I am putting myself out there in a really vulnerable way. Hosting this podcast is a dream come true for me, and that's not ending anytime soon. But the next chapter of building my business and my brand, that sex educator, is really going to take its true form. I'm going to be real with y'all. I have been putting this off because I have been nervous as hell. I have been talking about doing this towards the end of every episode for at least a season and a half, if not 2 seasons, with every guest that I've had. And most of the time I have cut it out in editing, because if I put it out in the universe, it means I have to do it. I have gone from putting so much pressure on myself to make something so perfect and polished, all the way to having such extreme imposter syndrome. I have been a sexual health educator for almost 20 years, and I have been sitting here doubting my own knowledge and my own skill set. Every single guest I have had on, every single message I get from the listeners, and every ounce of support that I get from my friends and my loved ones has given me the confidence to take this leap. So with that, I will be taking a bit of a longer than usual break before starting season 5. I want to be very clear. I am not disappearing. I am building. I will be spending the next several months creating educational workshops that go deeper into the things I've been talking about on this podcast since I began in 2023. Workshops around communication, digital consent, LGBTQ plus inclusion, reproductive justice, things that you can actually take and use in your everyday life. This is going to be the sex education that you should have gotten, and then some. So while I'm stepping away from the mic for a little bit, I'm really stepping deeper into this work. and I really want you to be a part of it. Make sure you are following me on Instagram and Threads because I'm going to be sharing more about these workshops, when they drop, and how you can get involved. I will also be sharing a ton of opportunities to hear my voice as I am guest appearing on several different podcast episodes and appearing in several different types of events, both in person in Rochester and virtually as well. As I get ready to wrap up, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for listening, for sharing, for being in conversation with me this season. Thank you to all of the guests who said yes when I invited them to be on my show and then showed up and shared their knowledge and their stories. Thank you so much to all of the folks who have trusted me to be a voice in the sexual health space that is honest and fun. This really is a community to me, and I don't take that lightly. Season 4 was about understanding. It was about understanding myself, each other, and the world around us. I can't wait for you all to see the amazing journey that will be season 5. Until then, bye!